Did we take the magic out of our world? This is going to be about a half an hour talk about it. Now, there's a lot of different points I want to get into, all the way from I think that a lot of insane asylums were created in the late 1800s, early 1900s to get rid of the people who knew that magic existed and just to deem them crazy. I think the Bible mentioned magic a bunch, and when it was edited to the King James Version, they left out the Book of Enoch, which part of that wasn't found until the 1950s. But the Book of Enoch talks about how the Watchers, the angels that created the Nephilim, taught humans magic, and that was one of the reasons why the Great Flood even happened. The Great Flood makes way more sense in the Bible when you realize that the Book of Enoch takes place directly after Genesis, during Genesis actually, and it talks directly about how there was magic and witchcraft everywhere in the world, but to us it wasn't called magic and witchcraft. It was just a different way of harnessing energy. Just like how today we harness electricity by turning wind turbines and water wheels and everything else. I don't think it was magic as we call it. I think it was just a different way to channel the Earth's energy. We know that the Earth literally gives off magnetic fields and impulses all the time, and that might be why the pyramids are where they are, to harness that energy and to spread that power out. If you look at Nikola Tesla's original model of wireless energy, it's literally in the shape of a pyramid. It looks just like a recreation of the Great Pyramid, just on a smaller scale. So maybe the Great Pyramids were wireless energy, and we lost this technology because I don't think the ancient Egyptians and all these other ancient civilizations were as like dumb as we think they were, or like as technological irrelevant as we think that we were. I think they just had technology in a different way, and I think we would call that magic. Like I said, there's so many aspects to this, but the first one I want to get into is ways you can see in modern day that, and by the way, on the whole Bible thing, King James was terrified of magic and witchcraft, like absolutely terrified. That's why I was saying when it was edited to the King James Version, it was probably cut out. If you didn't know, the very first like witch trial, witch hunts that were like made famous later on were started by King James. And there was no way to win. If he accused you of being a witch, or one of his council accused you of being a witch, you could either say, yes, I'm a witch, and then they would kill you. Or you could say, no, I'm not a witch, and they would burn you and torture you until you admitted to being a witch, and at which point they would then kill you. So if somebody just thought you were a witch, that was like the way that you would actually get rid of people you didn't like, is just call them a witch. And if enough people believed you, they would be like, yep, dead. Sometimes it would backfire on folks. If you want to look up those stories, they'd be like, she's a witch. And that girl would be like, well, he's a witch. And they'd be like, you're both witches. And then both families would die. There was countless stories like that happening. And if you were a noble, you couldn't be a witch. So that was that was the way to keep themselves safe, is no one could accuse them because they wouldn't be nobility and a witch at the same time. It's impossible. God wouldn't mandate it. That's like a real thing. If you guys didn't know that about your King James Bible, which I don't think the Bible is silly. I think the King James version of the Bible is silly. But going back to these institutions, I think there was something called Tartaria in our very near past. That I did a whole hour-long video on Tartaria one time. And it's the belief that I think our civilization has been reset multiple times. And when we see these old Egyptian photos and stuff, and we're led to believe like it was, this is what happened or whatever, I don't believe any of that. It never makes sense to me that we have to unbury our past because, like, for example, we have to excavate ancient Egypt all the time, right? And they are always finding new stuff. There's never not been Egyptians. So why did this stuff go away? Like, it doesn't make sense. There's all these ancient civilizations that have never, supposedly in our history, never not had people who lived there. So why do we have to unbury this past? And I think that every time our civilizations get reset, we have to kind of start over, and different brains come up with different ways to make technology. So we would call things that you would see like in Lord of the Rings or something, Harry Potter, as magic, when it actually just could have been a way that they knew how to channel Earth energy. Or maybe our Earth literally has shifted. We know that the magnetic fields shift all the time. Maybe we can't even harness energy that they had back then because the world gives off different energy than it used to. Who knows? There's a lot of theories on this. But I do think that there is something to magic. I just don't think that it's magic. I think it's just altered technology, altered energy harnessing. With that, I want to talk about like how I think we block out a lot of our magic in like modern day time period. I think that our world is way more fantastical than what we are aware of. So if you ever talk to any old timers, you always hear all these ghost stories and stories of spirits, and like it just seems like they're seeing way more stuff than we are. And what's weird is You talk about ghost, it's always like a old Victorian ghost, or like this kind of ghost or that kind of ghost, whatever. But it's never like a modern day like crackhead ghost. Like you never see like a ghost with like a spoon trying to heat up and inject themselves. But you see like an old Victorian man walking with a cane and a top hat. And I think there's a reason to that. And I think it has to do with a lot of different things. I think it has to do with our electricity in buildings, and I think it has to do with water pipes in the walls and lead paint. The lead paint, I'm not going to get into that. I did a whole video on how lead paint could possibly trap spirits. If you want to go down that rabbit hole, go ahead. There's a big conspiracy about the reason why lead paint was outlawed, and it's not anything to do with it's bad for you to eat. The next, though, is the water lines. So I think that water in our modern day lives blocks out you all from having tons of interactions with spirits. Hold on just a second. I had to fart for a second. So I think that water lines in the walls prevent you from seeing a lot of stuff about spirits. So in ancient folklores and beliefs and superstitions, for example, if a Native American tribe got in a fight with another Native American tribe and they killed some of the other warriors, they would bury the dead of the opposite warriors on their side, on the opposite side of the river. And the other tribe would do the same thing. If they killed any of that tribe, they would bury it on the opposite side of the river. That way you bury your rivals on the other side of the river, because in theory, their spirits cannot cross water. That's why there's so many ghost stories about bridges, because supposedly if you get killed on a bridge, your spirit died on top of water. So now you're stuck there haunting above and below that bridge because your spirit is in this limbo space where it can't escape. So, like I said, Native Americans believe that. Tons of other religions and civilizations believe this as well. There's a lot of stuff that has to do with moats. Back in the medieval days, moats were believed to keep your enemies out, obviously, but it also was believed to keep bad spirits out and curses out. There is a huge rabbit hole you can go down to with spirit and waters. And in modern day time, we have pipes all in our house, which would prevent a spirit from entering your house. Like right now I'm in a bathroom and there's water pipes in the floors, the walls. So if a spirit was like trying to travel into my house, it couldn't, because it couldn't pass the boundaries of modern day water lines. Where you go back 100, 200 years ago, modern day water lines, that wasn't a thing. That didn't exist. So a spirit could just freely come into your house, which would explain why old timers and people from a long time ago had way more interactions with spirits. Like my great grandma is still alive, by the way. She's 103. It's crazy how many, like the women in my family just never die. All the men are dead. All the women are still alive. They're probably a vampire. That's a time for a different video. I think they're sucking the souls out of the men in my family. But anyhow, in her house, when I would visit her house when I was a kid, she still used an outhouse. Like there was an outhouse. So there was no water lines in the house except for the kitchen that was added later. Weirdly enough, my grandma had always said that the spirits would come in the front door of her house. Well, the kitchen was in the back door of her house. So a spirit couldn't come through the backside because there's water pipes in the backside of the house. Nowadays, there's water lines running all through your home. With that in the home, the other thing is the electricity. So there's electrical outlets and cords and wires in every room of your house. There's no exception to this. And there is a lot of research that has gone on to EMF fields and electronic impulses that could actually repel, things like that. So if a spirit was trying to manifest in your home, all the electricity actually might get in the way of it manifesting. Now, there's some arguments that would say it would make it easier to manifest, but there's a lot of arguments that say it would just repel it in general. And this is the same for cryptid creatures. So we're going to get off spirits for a second. In olden days, people used to say like, oh, I saw a werewolf, or I saw this vampire, I saw all of this stuff. So we know that a lot of animals that are really good at hiding, like the animal species that it's hard for us to find, is because they can actually sense electronic fields. So there's a few animals that you might not know can see it. Like foxes, for example, can literally see magnetic fields. A fox with its eyeballs, like looking around like me and you are, can see little waves in the air that is electronic fields. Foxes do not generally like to be around large amounts of electricity because it can kind of mess with that vision that they've got. A fox's vision actually gets better when they face true north, by the way. So foxes almost always attack their prey from the south facing north. Super weird, I know. Tons of birds, use magnetic fields, and we have all these problems with them flying into 5G towers, and when we put up new cell phone towers, it messes up their migration patterns. The same could be said if there's old spirits or old cryptids like Bigfoots or Thunderbirds or, the Loch Ness Monster. We know dolphins and whales, they also can get interfered by electronic waves. Which brings me to the thing that I think is weird about national parks. There are some areas in national parks that are called no light zones, where even if you get lost and need help, rescue crews have to get special permission to come save you because those are no light zones. And people say, oh, it's for the habitats, it's for this or that. In life and death situations, they still could possibly deny a rescue crew from using electronics and lights to go find you. My theory is that national parks exist as boundaries for some of these cryptids and creatures, and we let a few people in there as almost like an agreement, like, hey, we'll let a few people in there to hike and you can hunt every now and again. Just don't come into the cities. And vice versa, we will not build on your land or your property. That's a whole different video for another day. But the no light zones and, certain areas not being able to use electronics, is it because they can sense it and it pisses them off and they're going to come tear your ass up? I don't know. But all of this stuff could deter people from seeing sea serpents and everything. Think about, before we knew that giant squids officially existed, we made the movie 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Let this sink in for a second. No one had seen a living giant squid before the movie 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. That movie was a crazy fictional monster movie, but it was about a real monster that was really down in the ocean that we had never seen alive. Yet 500 years ago, they have tons of paintings and depictions of these giant squids attacking ships. What were those ships made out of? They were made out of wood, not metal. They also did not have electronic deterrents on them. So nowadays, every ship, even a small boat, has radars and sonars, and it's pinging this and it's pinging that. It's got electrical cords in there. It's got lights. It's got this humming noise from the engine. It's got tons of stuff that we know that giant squids are extremely sensitive to that would drive them deeper down in the ocean or out of the path of the boat entirely. So it's a constant deterrent all the time. We know in modern day time that sometimes bigger ships will steer whales out of their way because of the noises they give off. So what other sea serpents could be out there that we hear these stories of that it just drove them down? It's crazy to think about. There's so many possibilities out there, and our world is probably such a magical place. But we've built this fortress up essentially around all of us where there's a lot less chance of us to interact with it, especially if the electronic thing is true, because every one of us, almost to no exception, carries around a cell phone. And this is what I always bring up in the Bigfoot talks. Everybody always says, oh, why can't everybody get a clear picture of Bigfoot? It's always blurry. There's a good chance that if it's anything electronic or anything that gives off any kind of signal, there's a good chance he can feel it, sense it, hear it, whatever, and move away from it. But my big theory about Bigfoot is that he's not a flesh and bone creature anyhow. He's more of a spirit that can come and go out of our plane of existence. That's more of the Native American belief on him anyhow. So I think that Bigfoot's appearance might just actually be blurry instead of a solid creature, because he's in and out of our plane of existence. So it's either that or he can predator cloak. If you've ever watched the movie Predator, how he can turn invisible, but you can still see the blurriness of him there, which is a whole other thing called Glimmerman, which might be one and the same. Bigfoot and Glimmerman might be the same. We did a video on that 2 or 3 weeks ago. So what else could be interfering with what we know of in our modern world with what we would think is magic or fantastical? And the answer is we'll never know, because right now we're too integrated with technology for it to ever be reversed anyhow. We do all this drilling in the ground that if there's creatures or spirits or things in the ground that could be driving them deeper into the earth or off into areas that are so remote we might not ever see them, because we're always drilling. We're always got airplanes flying in the air, overhead. We've got electronics literally everywhere. If we got 5G towers just radiating signals all over the place, we could very well be driving away all the spirits around us. Just like those shark magnets. If you guys have seen those shark magnets, you can put one in your dive suit and it scrambles with the shark's electronic field senses, and it deters them away from you. So we could just be doing that constantly. Side note I wanted to throw in, I think there was a lot more magical creatures than what we even know of today. And I think we took a lot of them out of existence, such as dragons. I absolutely think that dragons exist in the past. If you want to look up the science of dragons, we would absolutely have almost no proof that they existed. So bird wing fossils are one of the rarest things we ever find. So imagine you find a dinosaur skeleton, but the bird wing part of it just disintegrated because the bones were hollow and fragile, and then the little membrane of the wing, that's not going to fossilize, so it's gone. we very easily could have had dragons. We have beetles that can produce fire, like they can breathe fire. There's literal beetles that can produce fire. They're called the spark bug. So if you want to look up that, just imagine a big creature being able to do the same thing. The beetle that does it, it has a little thing it can click together that creates a spark, and the oil that comes out of it is very flammable. So imagine something big just being able to, like, on its teeth or something, and then have oil that comes out. Spark bugs do it. They literally create fires in the wild. It's really cool. And I think that a long time ago, like every culture that's out there had dragons, like all of them. Now, a lot of theories are that they were finding dragon bones and dragon fossils, like the Japanese did. The Japanese believed that dragons were real, and they had a shrine, and literally in the shrine was a Triceratops skull. So, and there's a lot of theories out there that the whole idea of dinosaurs is to throw us off the trail of dragons, which I don't know why they would not want us to know that dragons existed, but that goes a lot into like the Bible thing again too, and it's a Crusader thing. Is dragons were supposed to be a symbolism; they weren't supposed to be real. But then you can go see like these stories that the reason why dragons don't exist anymore is that knights and warriors would literally, when the dragon would leave the nest, they would break the eggs, and they actually couldn't kill the dragons and overcome the dragons. We just had to outlive the dragons and break their eggs and stop them from reproducing. There's a big story if you want to go on that rabbit hole as well. I hope I gave you a bunch of little outlets to explore. Now, what's funny is a lot of people say that magic can't exist today, that it's silly, it's dumb, it's stupid. And those same people will also believe in the Bible. And the Bible very explicitly says that magic is real. And it says that you are not allowed to do it. Like it says in like multiple different places in the Bible that you'll go straight to hell, essentially, if you do that. It says that you'll never inherit the kingdom of God. So it's always so funny that there'll be these big Bible believers that say, oh, magic is silly, or oh, that's just superstition. That's not real. That's not this or that. And that's why so many people were against Harry Potter when Harry Potter came out. Now, it talks specifically about do not tell fortunes, do not do divinations, do not do all this stuff. And the only way that I can say that would be real is because if it wasn't real, then God wouldn't care if you did it or not. Because you can play pretend, right? So if it's not pretend and it's real, that would be the only reason why he didn't want you to do it. And it specifically says in the Bible is because it uses, this is where it gets weird, entities that are not God. Which we've done whole videos before about how there is many other entities besides God. And I think God is one of many different entities out there. In fact, the Bible itself has two different gods, the Old Testament God and the New Testament God. They're not the same, by the way. If you think they are, go read it again. It talks about they have two specifically different names. And they get referred to as God, but they have two different proper names. And then he talks about the angels and the devil and all this other stuff. And, it says that God is the only one that's immortal. So that means that angels aren't immortal, so they can die and go too. And then also we've tied it into Greek mythology and Norse mythology and all this stuff. I think everybody was seeing the same stuff. I think they were seeing, there was God, or, whoever the leader was of the deities, which the Greeks called him Zeus, Norse called him Odin, because they all had a son, Hercules, Thor, that went to Earth and was like half mortal, half human, Jesus. And then they all came to a tragic end during their times on Earth trying to save humanity and make them better. So they talk about Saint Michael and all these Saint Peter's and all this stuff, and then different religions call them different gods. There's Loki and Lucifer. There's I'm going blank on everybody that's ever existed, I guess. Poseidon and Hades and all this other stuff. They all have I think they all were seeing the same thing and just interpreting it differently. And it always says, the Bible, that God's a jealous God. Well, he could only be jealous if there was other things that there were to be jealous of, other things that threatened his power, which is why he hated Lucifer so much, because Lucifer threatened his power and, threatened an uprising. So magic has to be real if you believe in the Bible. It has to be. And it has to use a source that is not him to do it. And that's why it forbids it so much in the Bible. So am I saying I believe 100% in the Bible? Absolutely not. No, I think the Bible is not a book of God, it's a book of man. And it's been heavily edited. I think there's a lot of truths in there. And I think there's a lot of heavy edits in there. So, once again, like I said, if you want to say you believe every page in the Bible, then you have to believe in magic. And you have to believe that it comes from a different source besides God. And there's truth to it. If you want to say you don't believe in the Bible, now we can have a conversation on science and logical and all this stuff besides just emotion. Could it exist? Abso-freaking-lutely. We find ways all the time to harness thermal energy, or different ways that energy can be manipulated besides just electricity. So if you could find a way to release that energy, it would work. And what I always think is funny is wizards and all this stuff that it's always being depicted use staffs or rods or wands. And that's true for the Bible folks too out there. That's, when they threw the scepter down and it turned into a snake. If you think about the energy coming up through your feet, and if you know how electricity works, if there's any engineers out there, it needs an outlet, or it will actually do harm to yourself. It needs an outlet. So we know that staffs and wands and wood and all this stuff are great conductors for the person that is there. Like if you're going to touch electricity in real life, you can touch it with a wooden stick and you're fine. So, and that grounds it out. But if you're wanting to release it, if you could figure out a way to channel it up through your body and then release it out of a staff or a wand, it could. Am I saying that could exist today? I don't know. Probably not. Maybe. We don't know how the Earth's magnetic fields are different. Like, we can look as scientists, we can look and see that our axis has changed. Our magnetic fields have changed. The poles have switched and flipped at the same time is what I was trying to say, multiple times. So the way our Earth's energy works could be entirely different than it was 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 years ago, and so on. And it could still change all the time. We know that we used to have different layers of the ozone. We know that in the past we've had more and less layers of the ozone. So a lot of global warming freaks always say, oh, the second I say there's more layers of the ozone, there's also been less layers of the ozone than we have right now. And I think that's something that our Earth just goes through these cycles. So we don't know, our Earth is changing all the time, and the whole principle of magic is that it's essentially nature bound around us. So if nature is changing, then the rules of it could change, the outlets of it could change. And I think some people can be more in tune to it versus others. Like, have you seen the weird guy that can take any metal object and just stick it to his body and it just sticks to him? That guy's got something weird going on. I think some other people could naturally have those kind of weird things going on where they're more in tune to that earthy, naturey side of magic. The last thing I'll get into is I think there's a lot of substances that could tap you into these other powers, these other worlds, these other things. There is way too many weird coincidences out there when you start looking into people that routinely do DMT and shrooms and things like that will go to the same places, it seems like, and they'll see the same things. And these are wildly abstract things that don't make any sense, but yet they'll describe the exact same thing. And I do think there's different planes of existence around us all the time. And maybe if you had ways to tap into those planes or tap into those places through its, whether it's through meditation or whether it's through some, substances that, kind of heighten your senses, or whether it's through, how you channel your own inner energy. I think a lot of those things could come into play with how that energy would interact with you and how you could also interact with it. And there's so many more things we could get into, the supernatural sides of magic, talking about the fae and fairies and the fairy folk and fae rings and things like that. That might be portals into different planes of existence, but that's a video for another day. So I hope you enjoyed this one. Kept it a little bit shorter than some of my big ones. If you like these talks, you can go watch the podcast version of this on Spotify and Apple Music, or Apple Podcasts, whatever. It's called Matt, M-A-T-T, from Nomads. If you're on Facebook and TikTok, it's Nomads Animal Encounter. I would really love to see you on the Facebook more than anywhere. And we do have a YouTube. It's called Nomads Animal Reserve.